Good evening. Hope all of you are safe and well. The Ladies Subcommittee is organizing a program on the virtual platform, and this is a baby step for us to continue doing so in future. This being our very first, we hope to be forgiven for glitches, if any. Unfortunately, Srimati Kollani Ghosh, the chairperson of the Ladies Subcommittee, cannot be present with us this evening, but she has sent a message of welcome. To get over the coronavirus disaster and the loss of so many friends, at least for a little while, the Ladies Subcommittee decided to fall back on a little entertainment that we can all share through a virtual dramatized reading of Three Men in a Boat by Mr. Pradeep Mitra, the noted theatre personality and a member of our club. The program will be of 45 minutes duration approximately. I hope you will all enjoy the brief relief from anxiety, pain, and sorrow. A brief introduction of Three Men in a Boat. Three Men in a Boat by Jerome K. Jerome is a comic travelogue published in 1889. The book became an instant success and is found in print even now. It generated a lot of interest in those times and contributed significantly towards the River Thames becoming a major tourist attraction. In its first 20 years of publication, the book not only sold over 1 million copies worldwide, but influenced many humorists and satirists in England and other countries. The book has been successfully adapted for dramatization on radio, stage, TV, and other media outlets. This evening, Pradeep will be performing a solo dramatized reading, edited and created by his mentor, Phyllis Bose, the artistic director of the erstwhile Actors Company. Members, sail along with Pradeep and enjoy. Over to you, Pradeep.
It all began one day when we were sitting in my room comparing notes about how ill we all felt. Harris said that he felt such extraordinary fits of giddiness come over him at times that he hardly knew what he was doing. And so, of course, George had to say that he had fits of giddiness too and hardly knew what he was doing. With me, it was my liver that was out of order. I knew this because I'd been reading a circular which detailed the various symptoms by which a man could tell when his liver was out of order. I had them all. I remember going to the British Museum once to read up the treatment of some minor ailment of which I had a touch of, hay fever, I think it was. After reading all that I needed, I idly turned the leaves and began to study diseases. Oh, I forget which first caught my eye, but before I had glanced halfway down the list of symptoms, I knew I had got it. Oh, I sat frozen with horror, turned the pages. I came across typhoid fever, read the symptoms, discovered that I had typhoid fever, must have had it for months without knowing it. I came to St. Vitus's dance, found as I expected that I had that too. So I thought I'd better start at the beginning and make a more systematic investigation of my case. I read up ague, learned that I was sickening for it, and that the acute stage would start another fortnight. Bright's disease, I was relieved to find I had only in a modified form. And as far as that was concerned, I might live for years. Cholera. Now, cholera I had with severe complications. Diphtheria I seem to have been born with. Well, I went through the 26 letters to discover that the only malady I did not have was housemaid's knee. I felt rather hurt about this at first. It seemed like a sort of slight somehow. However, upon reflection, I decided to be less selfish and to do without housemaid's knee. I had gout in its most virulent form and had been suffering from zymosis since childhood. There were no other diseases after zymosis, so I concluded there was nothing else the matter with me. What an interesting case I must be from a medical point of view. What an acquisition to a medical school. Students would have no need to walk around the hospital. All they would need to do was to walk around me and take their diploma. I had walked into that reading room a happy, healthy man. I crawled out a decrepit wreck. So we sat there for half an hour describing to each other our maladies. I described to George and Harris how I felt when I got home in the morning, and they told me how they felt when they went to bed. George stood on the hearthrug and, by some wonderful feats of dexterity and powerful and clever acting, illustrated how he felt at night. Oh, what we need is rest, I said. Rest and complete change. Overstrain on brains has produced a general depression. Change of scene and absence of necessity for thought will restore the mental equilibrium. Harris suggested a sea trip. But for a sea trip, we'd need a month, and we only had a fortnight. Well, let's go up the river then, said George. We'll have fresh air, exercise, and quiet. So it was agreed. The dog, Montmorency, was not happy about the idea, as I recall, but was outvoted 3-1, and the project was carried. So we got out our maps and discussed plans. We'll start on Saturday morning from Kingston, said George. Shall we camp out or sleep at inns? We'll tent it when it's fine and pub it when it rains. Sleeping arrangements settled, we moved on to discuss what we would take with us. We won't take a tent, said George. We'll have one of those boats with a canvas cover that you pull over at night. Simpler and more comfortable. Well, it seemed a good idea, and so we adopted it. We need a blanket each, said George. A lamp, soap, a brush and comb between us, a toothbrush each, toothpaste, shaving tackle, and a couple of large towels for a spot of early morning bathing. Have you noticed that People will make gigantic arrangements for a spot of early morning bathing when they get anywhere near the water, but they don't bathe at all when they get there. We knock up to food, said George. We shall begin with breakfast. We need a frying pan, a teapot, a kettle, and a spirit stove. So we made a list of the things to be taken. The next day, which was Friday, we met in the evening to pack. We had a Gladstone bag for the clothes and a couple of hampers for the utensils and victuals. I volunteered to pack. I know what you two duffers are, and I do pride myself on my packing, I said. It is one of the many things that I feel I know more about than any other person living. They fell in with my suggestion with a readiness that was uncanny. They lit their pipes and settled themselves comfortably to watch. But mind you, this is not what I had intended. What I had meant, of course, was that I should supervise the job and that these two should potter around under my directions. There's nothing that irritates me more than people watching when I'm working. Oh, however, to survive anything else, and finally I had the Gladstone bag packed. I sat on it and strapped it up. Ain't you going to put the boots in? Asked Harris. Just like Harris. He couldn't have said a word until I had the bag packed and strapped. I thought you were the expert, old boy. George is one of those irritating, senseless, chuckle-headed, crack-jawed laughs. Oh, they do make me wild. Well, I opened the bag and put the boots in. When I finished, it suddenly occurred to me that I had not packed my toothbrush. You know, whenever I go on holiday, I never knew whether I've packed my toothbrush or not. So I turned everything out while those two watched and could not find it. I found George and Harris's 18 times over before I found mine in one of the booths. So I repacked, slammed the bag to, and strapped it out. And then I discovered that I had packed my tobacco pouch, which I needed. So I had to open it up again. George, old boy, said Harris, since we are planning to start off in about 12 hours' time, I think we had better do the rest. I agreed. They began in a light-hearted way, obviously intending to show me how to do it. But I waited. I knew. Harris, you've packed the strawberry jam on top of a tomato and squashed it, said George. He scraped the tomato out with a teaspoon. George, you damn fool, you've trodden on the butter, screamed Harris. I moved it closer to watch. It irritated them no end, I felt that. It made them more nervous than anything I could have said. They started getting excited. They stepped on things, put things behind them, and then couldn't find them. They packed the pies at the bottom and put heavy things on top and smashed the pies in. And as for the butter, I never saw anyone do more with 2 packs of butter in my whole life than they did. After George had got it off his slipper, they tried to put it in the kettle, but it wouldn't go in. So they put it down on a chair and Harris sat on it. It stuck to him and they went looking all over the room for it. Oh, well, they got it off and packed what was left of it in the teapot. But they did finally get it all finished after a fashion. Right then, said George. What time shall I call you in the morning? 7, said Harris. Oh, I'll wake you all at 6, said George. Always an early riser myself. Well, we all overslept. I woke up at about 9 o'clock just as Harris was beginning to make noises himself. George, who was supposed to have called us at 6, was still sound asleep with his mouth open. We finished dressing, then remembered that we had packed our toothbrushes, decided we were not going to unpack that bag again, not for anyone or anything, and had breakfast. We put our luggage on the doorstep and waited for a cab. Well, there did seem a great deal of luggage when we all put it all together. There was the Gladstone bag and one other small bag, 2 hampers, a large roll of blankets, 4 or 5 overcoats and macintoshes, a few umbrellas. There was a large melon all by itself in a bag because it was too bulky to put it anywhere. A couple of pounds of grapes in another bag, a Japanese paper umbrella, and a frying pan, which being too long to pack, we had wrapped in brown paper. We began to feel a little ashamed of our appearance and hoped that no one would come by. The local delivery boys began to come by. It was as though some urgent message had been flashed along the wires that there was a show on outside our house. Within 10 minutes, there were half a dozen lazy, useless delivery boys taking up the best viewing positions across the street. Well, we tried to look casual and relaxed. Do you think they're moving house? Asked one in a loud voice. Oh, you'd like to take a thing or two if you were going to cross the Atlantic in a small boat. And they ain't going to cross the Atlantic. They're crossing up the Amazon to find Dr. Livingstone, said another. Have you ever noticed there's never a cab around when you really need one? Oh, well, the cab did finally arrive, however, and before long, we were stowing our luggage around the boat that for the next 2 weeks was to be our home. I took the oars until we came up to Hampton Court. Have you ever been in the maze at Hampton Court? Asked Harris. Nothing to it. Studied it up in a map, you know. It's so simple, it's hardly worth the admission fee. We'll just go in so that you can say that you've been there. Absurd to call it a maze. We'll just stroll around for 10 minutes or so and then go and get some lunch. We met some people soon after we got inside. They had been there for 3/4 of an hour and were still looking for the way out. You can follow me if you like, said Harris. We are just going down to the center and then turn around and come out again. They fell in behind us and followed. We picked up various other people who had all had enough of the maze. People who had given up all hopes of ever getting in or out or ever finding their homes and families again. They joined the procession, blessing Harris, who was beaming with confidence. It's quite simple, really. All you have to do is to keep turning to the right, you know. Eventually, someone remarked, it must be a very large maze. Yes, it must be, said another, because we have walked a good 2 miles already. It does seem rather strange, said Harris. Still, stick to the rule, right every time, and we can't go wrong. Presently, a lady noticed half of a bun on the ground that she had thrown down some time before. Oh, impossible, said Harris. But this irritating lady persisted. She added that she wished she had never met Harris and that she thought he was an impostor. Now, it was at this point that George and I assured everyone that we were not with Harris and that we had never seen him before in our lives and that we thought he was an impostor too. Well, Harris said, best thing to do is to go back to the beginning and start again. We have obviously taken a wrong turn somewhere. So we all turned around and followed Harris in the opposite direction, back to the beginning. 10 minutes later, we came back to the center. Well, at this point, the crowd began to look dangerous, so Harris decided not to hang about. 10 minutes later, we came back to the center again. And after that, we just couldn't do anything. Whichever way we turned, we came back to the center. At last, we all went crazy and started shouting for the keeper. The keeper appeared on top of a ladder and began to shout directions at us. Well, he finally told us to stay where we were and he would come and get us. And as luck would have it, he was new to the business, a young keeper. When he got in, he wouldn't find us. And then he got lost. We had to wait until one of the older keepers came back from lunch before we could get out. We reached Sunbury Lock by 3:30. The river begins to flow more strongly there and just below the gates with the two wires on either side. Since I was at oars, I asked them if they thought it possible to row this bit. They replied that they thought it possible to row this bit. With a little extra exertion, I could do it. I was cheered that they thought me equal to the task, and I set myself up and pulled. I pulled splendidly. I got well into a rhythmical swing and put my arms, my legs, and my back into it. I set myself a quick, dashing stroke and worked in goddamn good style. Well, they certainly seemed to find it a great pleasure from their expressions. Moments such as this of warm closeness between friends seemed to make everything worthwhile, and I set about my task the harder in the knowledge that I was being truly appreciated. After about 5 minutes, so lost in my task had I become that I failed to notice that Harris and George were going purple with the effort of containing their amusement. I looked around to find that we were in exactly the same place as when I had started my exertions, and I'd been pulling like mad to keep the boat where it was. And had the additional agony of watching these two duffers covering themselves with violent laughing until we reached Waltham. We towed on then to Penton Lock. Oh, think we should camp here tonight, chaps? Asked George. Harris said, oh, I'm starving. Let's have supper first, then put up the canvas top afterwards. We lit the lantern, prepared the meal, and squeezed ourselves down to supper. For 35 minutes, not a sound was heard throughout that boat, save the clank of cutlery and crockery and the steady grinding of molars. Finally, George sat back and said, Harris sat back and said, And then finally, I sat back and said, how happy one feels when one is full. People who have tried it tell me that a clear conscience makes you feel happy, but a full stomach does the job just as well and is cheaper and more easily obtained. At that moment, I hit my head against one of the hoops. Did I mind? Not one bit. Then Harris trod on one of George's corns. Oh, mind the corns, old boy, said George softly. Half an hour earlier, George would have expressed wishes about Harris's fate in this world and the next that would have made a brave man shudder. Instead, Harris merely said, "Oh, terribly sorry, old chap," to which George replied, "No, it was my fault, old boy." Then Harris insisted, "No, it was my fault, really." It was a joy to hear them. I woke at 6 o'clock the next morning. George was awake too. We both turned around and tried to get back to sleep. Had there been an urgent reason to stay awake, like work or an urgent appointment, we would have dropped off quite easily. But because on holiday, there was no earthly reason why we should stay awake at that hour. It was in keeping with the general cussedness of things that we stayed awake. We pulled up the canvas and looked out. Oh, the water was damp and chilly. The wind felt cold and we shivered. Oh, we had decided, you remember, that we would take an invigorating swim in the morning. The general theory had been that we would fling off our blankets, throw back the canvas, spring into the water with a joyous shout, and revel in a long, delicious swim. Oh, it could be difficult to get back into the boat, old chap, murmured George. He then began to pull on his socks, which seemed to settle the matter as far as he was concerned. Harris asked, "Jay, are you going in?" Well, I explained that I'd observed snags about and weeds and things. "Oh, well, if you're going to make excuses, let's leave it," he said. The answers of me that seemed to suggest I'd let the side down very badly. So after a moment's hesitation, I picked up my towel and climbed out of the boat. I, of course, had decided to compromise by going down to the edge and splashing water over myself. I hung on to a branch and bent down to the water. Oh, God, it was bitterly cold and the wind cut like a knife. So I changed my mind and went back for the boat. But at that precise moment, the branch snapped and I fell into the water. "Oh, by Jove, old day's gone in," said Harris. "How's the water, old boy?" Between splutters, I managed to say, "Lovely. You are duffers not to come in. I wouldn't have missed this for the world. Why don't you try it?" "Oh, tomorrow, perhaps," mumbled George. I was very cold when I got back into the boat. "I'll fix breakfast," said Harris. "I'll cook you some of my famous scrambled eggs. You know, I'm very good at cooking scrambled eggs. Cook them all the time when I'm on picnics and out on yachts and things." He went on to explain that people who had tasted his scrambled eggs never cared for any other food afterwards and simply pined away and died when they couldn't get them. For an expert, he seemed to have some trouble breaking the eggs. Or not so much as breaking them as trying to get them into the frying pan when broken. He had trouble breaking them, and putting them in the frying pan. Oh, and keeping them off his trousers and running up his sleeves. But he got half a dozen in the pan eventually and then chivied them about with a fork. Well, it seemed harassing work as far as we could judge. Whenever he went near the pan, he burned himself. And then he dropped everything and danced round the stove, flicking his fingers and cursing. Well, we thought this was part of the mysterious in Harris. Altogether, it was one of the most interesting operations we had ever witnessed. We were quite sorry when it was over. The result was not quite the success that Harris had anticipated. It seemed so little to show for all his dancing around and stuff. 6 eggs had gone into the pan. Out came a teaspoonful of burnt, unappetizing mess. Oh, it's the fault of the frying pan, grumbled Harris. Impossible to work with inferior materials. We should have brought a fish kettle and a gas stove. We moved on from Runnymede. A little below Bunky Island, we drew up and lunched. We decided on the cold beef for lunch. And then we discovered that both George and Harris had forgotten to pack the mustard. Well, I don't care for mustard usually, but because there was no mustard, I found myself wanting it badly. In fact, I would have given worlds for it then. And then, of course, Harris had to say he would have given worlds for some mustard too. Anyone passing by at that moment with some mustard would have set up in worlds for the rest of his life. It casts a gloom over the whole boat, there being no mustard. We ate in silence. Well, we picked up a bit when George drew out a tin of pineapple from the hamper. We were all very fond of pineapple. We looked at the picture on the tin. We thought of the juice and we smiled at each other. Harris got a spoon ready. And then we looked for the tin opener. And we looked and we looked. We turned out the hamper. We turned out the bags. We took out the boards and the bottom of the board. We took everything out onto the bank and shook it. There was no tin opener. Harris tried to open the tin with a pocket knife, broke the knife, and cut himself badly. George tried with a pair of scissors. The scissors flew up and nearly put his eyes out. While they were dressing their wounds, he tried to make a hole in the thing with the spiky end of the hitcher. The hitcher slipped and jerked me out of the boat into 2 feet of muddy water. But the tin rolled over, undented, and broke a teacup. And then we all went mad. Harris went into the field and found a sharp stone. I held the tin. And Harris held the sharp point of the stone above the tin. And I brought out the mast and prepared to hit the tin with it. It was George's straw hat that saved his life. Luckily, I escaped with only a flesh wound. After that, we stood well back while I took the tin and hammered at it with the mast until I was too tired and sick at heart to hammer any more. Then Harris took it out and hammered it out flat and square and into every form known to geometry. But we just couldn't make a hole in it. Then we all sat down exhausted on the grass and looked at it. It drove Harris so furious that he ran at it and flung it far into the river. As it sank, we hurled our most special curses at it, got in the boat, and didn't stop until we reached Maidenhead. The only thing we had forgotten to purchase was water. So we had to choose to go without tea or to take water from the river. For chancing it, said Harris. It'd be all right if we make sure the kettle has boiled. All germs in the water are killed by boiling. So we filled our kettle in a quiet backwater and made sure it did boil. We made the tea and were settling ourselves down comfortably to drink it when George, with the cup to his lips, exclaimed, "What's that in the river over there?" "Where, old chap?" "There." I had spotted it. It was a dead dog floating peacefully, legs up through the rushes. Well, they both decided they did not want the tea after all. Unfortunately, I had drunk half of mine. The conversation then seemed to turn to rabies and typhoid and the like. The chances of having one or all of the possible ailments that might beset me. But George was the most optimistic. He thought I had almost a 50% chance of surviving for at least another fortnight. Well, we pushed on and put up for the night on one of the Shipley Islands. Oh, as we have plenty of time, we'll prepare a slap-up supper. I'll show you what can be done upriver in the way of cooking. We can use some odds and ends up by making an Irish stew, said George. Harris set about peeling the potatoes. He picked out a few of the biggest, and after half an hour had peeled 4. And the boat was full of potato peelings. The potatoes were the size of peanuts. George said it was absurd to make Irish stew with only 4 miniature potatoes. So we washed another 6 and put them in without peeling them. Now, the advantage of Irish stew is that you can put in almost anything. You can get rid of a lot of things this way. So we put in the remains of some cold beef, about half a peck of peas, a cabbage, some boiled bacon that we found. Then George found half a tin of potted salmon, so we put that in. Not to be outdone, I found a couple of eggs that had got cracked and put them in. George said they would thicken the gravy. I found half a pork pie, so we put that in. Lastly, some general bits and pieces, anything we could find, really. I forget exactly what. Oh, it was a great success. I don't think I ever enjoyed a meal more. It was fresh, piquant, and nourishing. One's palate gets so tired of the old hackneyed things. Here was a dish with a new flavor, with a taste like nothing on earth. Harris was disagreeable after supper. I think it must have been the stew that upset him. He's not used to high living. Then on a fine Sunday morning, having rested up, we moved on towards Wallingford. Coming up to the first lock, we observed George behaving oddly, or should I say more oddly than usual. He was smoothing out his trousers, ruffling up his hair, sticking his cap at a rakish angle on the back of his head, and at the same time trying to hide his huge feet. We thought at first that he had spotted one of his girlfriends, and we looked about to see who it was. We discovered that a photographer was setting up his apparatus on the bank to take a panoramic shot of the lock. Everyone in the lock seemed to have been suddenly struck wooden. They were standing or sitting about in the most quaint and the curious attitudes I've ever seen. All the girls were smiling sweetly, and the men were looking stern and noble. I saw that our boat would be in the forefront of the picture, and I thought it would be unkind of me to spoil the chap's work. So I faced round quickly and leant with careless grace upon the hitcher in an attitude suggestive of agility and strength. I arranged my hair with a curl over my forehead and threw an air of tender wistfulness in my expression. A loud voice was heard to shout from the bank, "Look at your nose!" Well, I could not look around without the possibility of the back of my head appearing in the picture, but I stole a sideways glance at George's nose, which seemed to be all right. I also squinted down my own nose, and that seemed to be in its usual place. Again came the same voice from the bank. "Look at your nose, you stupid ass! Push your nose out, can't you?" We dared not look around. The photographer's hand was poised, and the picture might be taken any second. I lifted my head, pushed my nose out, and hoped for the best. And then the whole lot started yelling at us, and we could not ignore their warnings any longer. We looked around to find that the nose of our boat was trapped under the woodwork of the log gates, with water pouring all round it and tilting it over. In a second, we would be under. Quick as thought, we seized the oars and with vigorous blows against the side of the log, released the boat, sending us all sprawling on our backs. Needless to say, the photograph was taken at that precise moment. A chap showed us the negatives. We did not come out very nicely in the photograph. Our feet were undoubtedly the leading feature of the shot. They filled the foreground completely. There was a great deal of unpleasantness over the business. The photographer thought we should take a dozen copies each, seeing that the picture was 9/10 us. The weather turned against us then. It was as though the photographer had put a curse on us. For the rest of the holiday, the weather declined steadily. We pushed on finally on to Oxford. Then George mentioned very casually that the train from the local station would get us home by 5, in time to wash up and eat at our favorite restaurant. Nobody spoke for some time. We looked at one another, and each seemed to see his own guilty thoughts reflected in the faces of the others. 20 minutes later, 3 figures might have been seen creeping stealthily towards the local railway station, carrying a Gladstone bag and sundry other items. On reaching Paddington, we took a cab directly to our restaurant, having dispensed with the idea of getting cleaned up first. We ate a hearty meal and finished the evening off by taking in a performance at the Alhambra. George closed the proceedings by proposing a toast. "Here's to 3 men well out on a boat, and jolly glad we were to be home too."
That was wonderful, Pradeep. Viewers, I hope all of you enjoyed yourselves. I would now request Mrs. Deepa Ghosh to give the vote of thanks.
Thank you, Mrs. Shubhadra Rajadhuri. Good evening, everybody. I am privileged to offer vote of thanks for this mesmerizing event. On behalf of the Ladies Subcommittee, I would like to thank Mr. Pradip Mitra for the stellar show this evening. I thank Dr. Parthasarathi Ghosh, Club President, and the entire Calcutta Club team for providing us with logistic support in organizing the show on virtual platform. Mrs. Sohini Guptu is a part of our subcommittee, but she deserves a special mention for creating a very attractive poster for the program. Special thanks to Mr. Romit Bid, host of this virtual show, without whom the event would have floundered. I would be failing in my duty if I don't mention one name, Mrs. Subhadra Roy Choudhury, who has been the pillar behind this successful event. Last but not the least, I would like to thank all of you who have joined in and made this virtual event a grand success. Thank you and stay safe. Wish you all a very good night.